talked about Gorbachev a little bit. This book is about what Russians themselves were doing and writing and thinking at the time. But we're here in the United States, and a lot of us like to pat ourselves on the back for what, say, the Reagan administration was doing with respect to Russia, or what Margaret Thatcher was doing. Could you try to, make sense of this? Because you're talking about the importance of ideas, and a lot of us in the United States like to think that by sending a clear signal about the moral nature, or I should say the immoral nature of the Soviet regime, that had a profound influence on the people within Russia. Try to help us make sense of that. How important was that, the U.S. engagement in the war of ideas, or was it not important at all?
Part of the reason I didn't deal with it in the book is because it's been written about. I mean, people went back and forth, they're proponents and opponents of how important the role of Ronald Reagan and the U.S. and Thatcher and so on. So it's not in the book, but of course, as I was reading those materials, clearly it was there. And I tell you, it's not so much, the stereotype is it's SDI. Reagan said, let's have strategic defense, and Gorbachev said, oh my God, unless we change our system, we'll never catch up with them, and they'll bankrupt us, and the country will be defenseless. There's clearly that line of thought, and it's not incorrect. I mean, that was on the back of their minds. But again, as I mentioned in the book, they knew from primarily from the American scientists who were fierce critics of Strategic Defense Initiative, that it's not good. I mean, it will be decades before it could even begin to approach a state in which, by then, I think both the U.S. and Russia had about 10,000 nuclear warheads. I mean, it was. I mean, yes, as a technological defeat, it was very important because, remember, they were Marxists, and the society is only as good as its economic state, as its economic progress. So what's happening? I mean, if we cannot catch up with the U.S. on SDI, what are we, inferior mode of production, to use this Marxist term? That clearly put a seed of doubt. But I think in terms of the people, and in terms of the public opinion, I mean, at worst, people were just scared. Oh, SDI, they didn't know it was defense. The propaganda put it in such a way that it's like another offensive thing. But where Thatcher and Reagan did come through, I think, in a much more effective way, is precisely what you mentioned, which is, the Reagan's '83 speech to the British Parliament. The Soviet Union is doomed to go to a trash heap of history. Mm-hmm. This is an evil empire, the famous evil empire speech. Now, we know now from the memoirs of dissidents, including somebody like Nathan Sharansky, who was in camp. I mean, he was in the prison camp at the time. That they were just delighted that finally somebody in the West had the temerity to call a spade a spade. And this, in essence, this is just a tiny issue, but it shows the power of the truth. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. And again, I think most of Russians probably did not know. I mean, after all, remember, Voice of America and the BBC and all the foreign stations were jammed until, I think, 87 or 88. So I don't think, we can talk about, millions suddenly saying, aha, Reagan is right. But I think the elite knew, and the intellectuals near the elite knew. And I think, remember, no matter what they said about the United States, by the way, the situation is exactly the same now. Mm-hmm. They could denounce it, they could have issues with it, but there's only one country in the world that matters to Russia, and that's the United States. It's not France, it's not Germany, it's not Denmark, and even Britain. And there's a huge store that is set by what American presidents say, because ultimately the Russians know that he was not appointed he was elected, that millions voted for him, and he honestly embodies the opinions of millions of Americans. And Russia always had this kind of bifurcated view. They wanted to be, they didn't, I mean, I should not say Russians, I should say the leaders and the people, they wanted to be like America. They wanted to be materially like America. They wanted to be glamorous like America. They wanted to be rich like America. And then there were all kinds of variations, in terms of political system. Some wanted it, some didn't. Bottom line is, this is the most respected country for the Russians in the world. And so if the freely elected leader of that country says, you're doomed to the dustbin of history and you're an evil empire, it had an effect. What's interesting, though, is that by 1990, well, actually by the end of '89, you didn't need Ronald Reagan. This was all in those essays. Mm-hmm. We are the most evil state in the world in terms of number of people that Stalin killed. Look how we had an alliance with Hitler, how hugely immoral and, in the end, counterproductive and murderous to us that all of that was. So Reagan anticipated beautifully, adumbrated, as we say, right? The sentiment, but the actual huge impact was when essentially the same stuff was repeated inside the country and said not in English but in Russian.